You're watching Money Talks with me, Oscar Subakti. Coming up on the program, can the BRICS group of emerging economies really challenge the dominance of the dollar? Why more than 1 billion people around the world are worried about putting a roof over their heads? And the best of the defence and aerospace industries on show here in Turkey. The BRICS summit of the world's emerging economies has concluded in Russia. It was the first gathering of the bloc since it expanded this year, and it's set to grow even bigger. Vladimir Putin says the growing interest in BRICS shows the world is now multipolar, and the idea of an alternative global payment system to challenge the dollar has also gained traction. Dasha Chernyshova reports.
BRICS leaders adopted a joint final declaration at the summit in Kazan with a focus on providing partner status to new members. Russia's President Vladimir Putin said the group cannot ignore the demand for BRICS membership in the global south, but that the group should not rush to expand in order to remain efficient.
World trade and the global economy as a whole, we have just stated this in the meeting, are undergoing significant changes. On the positive side, the center of business activity is gradually shifting towards developing markets, including the BRICS countries. However, there remains a significant crisis potential. The fact that the chronic growth of debt burden in developed countries continues, and the practice of unilateral sanctions, protectionism, and unfair competition is expanding.
Speaking at the expanded meeting in Kazan, BRICS leaders agreed on the need to accelerate the establishment of an independent global financial system, adding that current international bodies such as the Western-dominated World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund should be reformed in line with the expanded representation of developing countries.
Everybody is looking for opportunities to work independently from anyone or someone's wishes, whether they like it today or do not like it tomorrow.
Whilst the central role of the United Nations was acknowledged, reform of that body was also recommended.
BRICS called for reforming global governance, including the Security Council. It's something that has been persistent.
BRICS leaders supported the admission of Palestine to the United Nations as a full member and noted that countries have different national positions on the situation in Ukraine. On the sidelines, the leaders had numerous bilateral meetings, including the first sit-down between China's President Xi Jinping and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi since 2020.
The BRICS summit in Kazan cements the idea of creating alternative institutions independent of the West. It also served as a platform for wider discussions among member states without rushing into full-blown commitments. For now, Dasha Chernyshova, TRT World, Kazan, Russia.
Ovigwe Egwegu is a policy advisor at Development Reimagined and a columnist for the China-Africa project. He joins us now from Toronto. Really good to have you back with us, Ovigwe. We know the West is looking to actively isolate Vladimir Putin, but this summit has shown that there is a growing number of countries in the so-called Global South who are looking to actively engage with Russia as a founding member of BRICS. Why is there this growing demand to join the BRICS bloc of nations?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's very important to mention that the mindset that most countries around the world, like you said, the global south or global majority as they're being described now, is that the Ukraine war is not their war. So it cannot be the primary factor that will determine the relationship they have with Russia. They've chosen to have an relationship that is independent of how the West engages with Russia. Secondly, the BRICS is more than just Russia, right? So it is a developing grouping that has a lot of promises in terms of opening up global trade, global financial system to make it more democratic and prevent the situation where a country or certain countries can use unilateral trade restrictions and sanctions to dislocate economies around the world, like we've seen for many years. So these are some of the reasons why the BRICS itself is attractive, and also the fact that countries see their relationship with Russia as independent of the West's view of Russia.
Now, one significant topic of discussion at this year's summit was this idea of an alternative international payment system. We know that the US dollar is the dominant currency that's being used for international transactions when it comes to trade and other matters. How feasible do you think is this idea of de-dollarization, of challenging the US dollar as Russia and China wants to?
Yeah, so the thing to note here is that the current system that we have now, which of course the Bretton Woods system, was created, you could say, by the United States and its Western allies, right? And that has been the norm for many years. It has tremendous impact on global trade and economy and how the system works, right? But when we look at what is happening with BRICS now, some countries are leading initiative with support from most countries around the world to have alternatives because of how the current system have been abused in terms of sanctions. And Russia being one of the most sanctioned countries in the world, Iran another one, China also seeing the possibility of sanctions growing with tension with the US. There is of course it is imperative on them to take steps, to build an alternative system. For instance, you have out of these BRICS now, if you look at the outcomes of it, real initiatives that are coming up for interbank payment system, alternative interbank messaging system, depositories like Euroclear and Clearview have dominated, but now we're going to be seeing BRICS Clear, right? And all of this is meant to sort of put the building blocks of an alternative trade and economic system so that countries are not dependent on the Western system and also run the risk of having those sanctions imposed on their economies.
Yes, and we'll see if this idea gains traction in the near future. Vigwe Egwegu, thank you as always for joining us on the program. Land and housing tenure insecurity is an escalating global issue, exacerbated by rising inflation, conflict and economic instability. A recent report by Prindex shows a sharp rise in people fearing for their property rights. The report highlights the deep impact on global stability, economic equity and sustainable development, calling for urgent, localised policy interventions to address the growing disparities across regions and income levels. Prindex data reveals that more than 1.1 billion adults, or 23% of the global adult population, feel insecure about their property rights. This represents a 4 percentage point increase since 2020, with 239 million additional people feeling insecure. Much of this surge is concentrated in East Asia and the Pacific, predominantly in China. In North America, tenure insecurity jumped by 12 percentage points since 2020. Rising inflation and financial instability are major contributors, with 9% of respondents unable to pay their rent or mortgages. Even high-income nations are experiencing significant property insecurity despite their economic advantages. 44% of adults worldwide report owning or jointly owning property offering the greatest perceived security. Renters and those using family-owned property face more vulnerability, with 35% of renters and 23% of family property users feeling insecure. Formal property documents boost security, with 61% of owners having their names on legal documents. Meanwhile, only 40% of women globally have ownership rights, compared to 48% of men. In high-income countries, lower-income women experience 27% higher tenure insecurity than their wealthier counterparts. These disparities underscore the need for targeted policies to protect vulnerable groups. Let's get more on this now with Malcolm Childress, who's the co-director of Prindex and co-author of this report. He joins us now from Cali in Colombia. Welcome to the program, Malcolm. These statistics are alarming. More than 1 billion adults across the world feeling insecure, essentially about having roofs over their heads. What was the overarching trend that you found across all of these countries?
The biggest trend is a global increase in insecurity of property rights, as you noted, of about 4 percentage points globally, which is a major concern.
And Malcolm, aside from conflict zones, which other regions are experiencing a sharp rise in housing insecurity?
There are increases across the the entire globe, but perhaps surprisingly, some of the most highest increases occurred in North America and in East Asia Pacific, as well as in Europe and Central Asia. And these are high and upper middle income countries.
Yes, I do want to ask you about that because we often hear about the housing affordability crises in countries such as the US, UK, Australia and other developed economies. Why is it that in these seemingly wealthy nations, more and more people are feeling more insecure about where they live?
It is a combination of factors. But it seems to have to do with the gap between the cost of housing, and in particular cost of rental housing, and people's income, and that there is a broadening gap between cost and income.
Yes, and lastly, Malcolm, I'd imagine given the diverse range of countries, there are a diverse range of possible solutions as well. What are some of those in your view?
Absolutely. I think the traditional approaches of trying to improve documentation and security through formalization of rights continues to be a crucial policy. But I think the issues of affordability and rental also point to the need for targeted interventions around things like eviction protection, for example, funds that can be accessed on an emergency basis to avoid eviction, and also new types of arrangements such as community land trusts, and perhaps also looking back to earlier types of policies such as expansion of social housing.
Malcolm Childress, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much again for joining us on the program. The world is drowning in debt, inflation is biting hard and growth is grinding to a halt. Add in the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, the slowdown in China and uncertainty over the next US president. There's been a lot weighing on the minds of leaders meeting at the annual World Bank and International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. IMF Chief Kristalina Georgieva has issued a stark warning at the gathering. She warns the global economy is at risk of falling into a vicious cycle of low growth and rising debt, limiting the ability to tackle major challenges like jobs, income and climate change. Even with pockets of economic resilience, people around the world are struggling with high inflation and stagnant wages, leading to widespread dissatisfaction and economic pressure. The IMF projects global GDP growth will slip to 3.1% by 2029, well below the pre-pandemic average of 3.8%, as trade becomes a less powerful engine due to fragmentation and US-China tensions. Georgieva urged China to shift its economic focus from exports to consumer spending to boost growth and confidence. Government debt is skyrocketing, with global debt expected to hit $100 trillion this year and could equal 100% of global GDP by 2030, driven by high spending and resistance to raising taxes. Well, despite challenges, the IMF sees a potential for a soft landing, with inflation declining and no major global recession expected. Meanwhile, in Paris, world leaders were hoping to bring some relief to Lebanon. As the war rages between Israel and Hezbollah and Lebanon's economy falls further apart, the international community is stepping up with promises of support. Malik Fouda has the details.
La guerre doit cesser au plus vite.
The war must end as soon as possible. There must be a ceasefire in Lebanon.
The international community has come together in Paris for Lebanon, as the country faces one of the biggest humanitarian crises in its history. More than 1.4 million people have been displaced by the war, and hospitals are overwhelmed. And a weakened economy is on the edge of collapse.
I stress that alongside the humanitarian aspect and the efforts to assist humanitarian side, this is not enough because we must protect humanity before we help humanity. The legitimacy of nations and humanity in the world, I think, is in danger in the current times.
Lebanon's army has been hit hard by years of economic crisis. Its outdated equipment and lack of air defenses leave it poorly positioned to defend against ongoing Israeli strikes. At the Paris conference, 70 countries and international organizations pledged over $1 billion, $800 million for humanitarian aid and $200 million for military support. French authorities also stressed that a political solution is essential for lasting peace.
Remercier et je voulais vous en féliciter.
We can't be satisfied with a humanitarian and security response to the crisis. We must find a diplomatic solution.
Meanwhile, years of war and political instability have left the country in a fragile state. There hasn't been a president for 2 years, and this lack of leadership makes it hard to push through needed reforms. Lebanon's cash-based economy also raises concerns about corruption. Experts say this could make it hard for aid to reach those who need it.
La guerre doit cesser au plus vite.
I regret that Israel continues its military operations in Lebanon, in the south, in Beirut and elsewhere, and that the number of civilian victims continues to increase.
The Paris meeting also aimed to find ways to support the Lebanese army. It discussed helping the UN peacekeepers in the country, which included many European troops. Both the army and the peacekeeping mission say they have come under attack by Israel. And as the world rallies behind the embattled country, the road to peace remains steep. The pledge in Paris may be a start, but Lebanon is now running out of time. Malik Fouda, TRT World.
The Iraqi city of Mosul, a place that was once at the center of the battle against Daesh, is now a symbol of resilience and rebuilding. Our team was granted rare access to explore Mosul as it recovers from recent traumatic events that the city's residents are still trying to forget. Obaida Hito sent us this report.
On the banks of the Tigris River, in the heart of Mosul, sits a museum, not built by historians or curators, but by the people who lived through the city's darkest days.
Thanks God, we have really come back well from all that event, especially on the social level, because people try to continue with their life and don't stop on what happened after ISIS. All the pieces that we have here, they have come from the community. They are a donation from them. The destruction was massive after ISIS. It was about 80% in the old city of Mosul.
During its occupation, the Daesh terror group pillaged and destroyed many of the city's ancient landmarks, including the centuries-old Syriac Catholic Church of the Virgin Mary, which was massively damaged in 2017 during the operation to liberate the city.
The renovation has taken 2 years and 1 month to restore the building to its previous condition, while also protecting the special characteristics of this particular church. We collected more than 7,000 of the church's original stone pieces, and we were able to use around 4,500 of those pieces in the rebuilding process. Now the church is complete, and we will open it again soon.
The revival of Mosul is not just about the past, it's also about emerging opportunities. And just a few streets away from here in the center of Mosul is a booming sweets business whose owners say they depend on Turkey and Turkey's excellent products in order to make sure that their business here is a success. Inside this upmarket patisserie in a middle-class neighborhood in Mosul, Syrian pastry chef Mustafa Sabuni, who trained in Turkey, says he hopes to rebuild his own life and use his expertise to help revive the city.
After 2018, Mosul is growing fast and we are growing too. We are also trying to improve life here too. 75% of the raw materials we use are organic, high quality and from Turkey. Our machines are all from Turkey, including the fridges, ovens and displays. The people of Mosul are very cultured and many of them who left have returned. They are always looking for high quality sweets like ours.
In a city once shrouded in black, the scars of war are fading. And the city's residents say their future looks brighter with each passing day. Obeidehito, TRT World, Mosul, Iraq.
Prices of basic commodities have skyrocketed in northern Gaza, piling pressure on families already traumatized by relentless Israeli attacks and a deepening humanitarian crisis. Ashraf Shannon has this report.
Food prices are soaring in northern Gaza. Markets are suffering from a severe shortage of food supplies and high vegetable prices with few available items found in the markets. Since Israel began a renewed military offensive in northern Gaza, humanitarian groups say that virtually no aid has entered the area. Israel's own statistics show that aid deliveries to Gaza as a whole have collapsed when compared with the same period in September.
A kilogram of oranges costs $15, which is 10 times its normal price. There is hardly any vegetables and only eggplants and lemons are available, and a kilogram of eggplants costs almost $20. People can't afford to buy food, and myself as a vendor, I can't afford to provide food for my family.
Prices of food have shot up as a result of Israel's imposition of strict conditions on the entry of goods and humanitarian aid for residents who have been enduring war and displacement for over a year.
We can't even buy simple things to eat because the prices are very high. We rarely bought eggplants in the past, and now we can't afford to buy them. I spent all day finding food for my family, and I can't afford to feed them. We are starving because of the war.
The lack of food has prompted UN officials to warn that supplies necessary for survival are running out in northern Gaza. Across the Gaza Strip, more than 2 million people, or 96% of the population, are facing high levels of food shortages, with 1 in 5 people facing starvation.
I can't even afford to buy a bottle of cooking oil because it costs around $25 compared to $2 before the war. A kilogram of sugar that used to cost $1 is now priced at $40. We don't have any income and prices continue to go up.
According to the United Nations, a high risk of famine persists across Gaza as the war continues and humanitarian access is restricted. Most of the population has lost their sources of income due to the ongoing war in Gaza, exacerbating their economic situation and their ability to meet basic living needs. Ashraf Shannon, TRT World, Gaza.
As the world grapples with the urgent need to transition to renewable energy, Turkey is stepping up its efforts to become a leader in green power. With increasing pressure to reduce carbon emissions and secure energy independence, the country is now setting ambitious targets for the future. On Monday, the government unveiled a new roadmap for its renewable energy landscape, aiming to boost wind and solar power capacity over the next decade. Speaking at the launch of the Energy Transformation Renewable Energy 2035 event, Turkish Energy and Natural Resources Minister Alparslan Bayraktar laid out the government's vision for a cleaner, greener future. The roadmap aims to quadruple wind and solar capacity to 120,000 megawatts by 2035, positioning Turkey for significant advancements in sustainable energy development. To drive this transformation, the country will hold annual auctions for 2,000 megawatts of wind and solar projects, with the first auction to be announced next week. The lengthy 48-month approval process for renewable projects will also be shortened to under 2 years, ensuring faster implementation of green energy initiatives. The ambitious renewable energy targets are part of a broader $108 billion investment and reform initiative. The plans include upgrading infrastructure and developing a new transmission grid, as well as modernising state-run energy companies to drive the country toward energy independence. Ömer Bakalolu was at the launch event and sent us this report.
From the announcements made today, it's clear that Turkey is ready to take its journey towards sustainability to the next level. Already ranked 11th globally and 5th in Europe for installed renewable energy capacity, the country is now setting its sights even higher. The focus is on significantly expanding wind and solar power, along with hydro and geothermal energy. The pledges are part of Turkey's efforts to reach carbon neutrality by 2053 and secure its energy independence. Today's strategy also highlights the country's commitment to becoming a trade center in the energy sector.
And if you have any stories you'd like our reporters to look into or any questions for our experts, you can send us a post on X at TRT Money Talks. And that is all from Money Talks for now. From me and the whole team here in Istanbul, thanks for watching. Bye for now.